Hello everybody, I'm James Oswald, otherwise known as J.D. Oswald, author of the fantasy series The Ballad of Benfro, the first book of which is this, Dreamwalker. I had been going to appear at Cymera Fest along with Gray Williams to talk about our respective books, but due to all sorts of unfortunate things, that's not happening now. So instead you get me in my study, posing in front of a random selection of books, and I'm going to read an extract from Dreamwalker, the first book in the Ballad of Benfro. This book's heavily inspired by my learning the Welsh language. There are lots of Welsh references in it. Some of the words are quite unpronounceable. I'll do my best. Prologue. Birth. When Balwan's last sits on the stolen throne, and Kittling sleeps beside the babe ne'er born, when darkness stills the forest birds at noon, in blood and fire glad shall rise anew. The prophecies of mad Goronwy. Wind ripped through the trees like war, tearing the last autumn leaves from the tortured branches and flinging them across the pathway. Rain-heavy clouds scudded across the night sky, alternately covering and uncovering patches of dark, star-speckled heavens. The thin glow from a shielded lantern on the front of the wagon cast insufficient light on the path. Occasional downpours crushed the ground, boiling the hard-packed earth in a short-lived frenzy and spooking the horses as they pulled wearily at their task. Father Gideon shivered, pulled his cloak tighter around his neck with one hand, gently teasing back the reins with the other. He whispered calming noises to the horses, trying to instill a sense of peace, even though his words were whipped away on the wind, never reaching the twin pairs of pointed ears, twitching back and forth on the edge of fear. It was difficult to judge distance in the dark, impossible to tell how long he had been driving through the foul storm, but he was fairly sure their destination was not far. A quiet sob of pain from behind him reminded him of why he was out here, braving this foul weather when he could have been back in the castle, enjoying a tankard of ale and a bowl of stew in front of the great refectory fire. Pushing aside the dripping canvas flap, Father Gideon peered into the back of the wagon. A single hooded oil lamp lit the interior poorly, with flickering, shadowy yellow light, swaying back and forth to the rhythm of the wheels on the track. Lying in the middle of the wagon, surrounded with blankets and cushions, the princess slept. She looked almost at peace for a change, although even sleep could not hide the shrunken lines of her once beautiful face. Even sleep could not mask the laboured effort of every breath, or the regular spasms that racked her prone form from head to toe. The swelling of her belly, Prince Balch's seed, stretched out of all proportion the tiny emaciated figure that carried it. Still, Father Gideon knew it wasn't the child that was killing Princess Llane. Her strength of character and desire to see the pregnancy to term were perhaps the only things keeping her alive. And for all his knowledge, gleaned from a lifetime of study and travel, of administering to the sick and needy, yet he had no idea what it was that had struck his charge so low. A snickering whinny from one of the horses brought Father Gideon back to his senses. Turning away from the princess, he saw a faint light ahead, and soon the wagon was pulling across a small clearing towards the cottage he had not visited in 15 years. It was a curious building, much larger than its proportions suggested. 2 windows, one either side of a wide doorway, looked out onto a well-cultivated vegetable patch. The structure was only 1 story high, and yet the apex of the simple roof was over 30 feet off the ground. The single stone chimney leaked thin smoke into the night, and a comforting glow glinted past drawn curtains. As he approached, the swirling wind changed in direction, coming straight from the cottage. Instantly, the horses tensed and stopped, throwing their heads around in uncertainty and alarm. Cursing, Father Gideon remembered where he was, to whom he was forced to turn. With a flick of the reins, he turned the wagon round on the wide path so that it stood between the cottage and the horses. They calmed noticeably, and he allowed them to drop their heads to the grass, pulling on the late brake to stop them straying too far. The princess weighed next to nothing, yet Father Gideon was aware that he was no longer a young man as he carried her the last few tens of yards to the cottage. As if sensing his arrival, the door opened as he climbed the first wooden step towards the wide deck that surrounded the whole building. A vast shape blocked most of the light from escaping, and an irrational fear swept over him for an instant. "Gideon," the figure said, its voice at once low and yet unmistakably feminine. "I was expecting you. Bring her in." "Thank you, Morgwm," Father Gideon said. He knew there was no point in asking how she had known of his journey when none back at the castle knew that he was gone, let alone that he had brought the princess with him. Morgwm the Green had always been an enigma to him, but her knowledge of medicine was unsurpassed in the whole of Ballad. Only the petty prejudices of men kept them from realizing what treasures of hidden knowledge were her and her kind. Morgwm stepped back to allow him entry to the front room of the cottage, and he marvelled once more at how lithe such a big creature could be. Her tail looked to be a hindrance, yet it moved with her, missing all obstacles as if it had a mind of its own. Her taloned feet should have gouged the polished wooden floor, and yet she trod with such delicate care that not a scratch could be seen. "You're staring again, Gideon," Morgwm said, the bright scales round her eyes flickering in the light from the fire. "I'm sorry," Father Gideon said, a flustered embarrassment reddening his cheeks, as if he were a teenager trying to speak to a girl who had caught his notice. "It's just, I had forgotten." "That I am a dragon?" Morgwm asked, a faint chuckle in her voice. "Would that all men could be so fair-minded. But come, place her here." She indicated a low table close to the fire, which had been spread with thick blankets. "Let us see what is wrong with your girl." Father Gideon lowered his charge onto the table. She had slept throughout, although spasms of pain regularly racked her body, and a sheen of grey sweat dampened her face, clagged her once lustrous hair to the sides of her bony skull. "She was taken ill some months ago," he said, stepping aside so that Morgwm could get closer. "Not long after the child first began to show. I've tried all I know, yet she grows worse with each day." The dragon bent low over the princess, her hands going from head to neck to the large bulge of belly, razor-sharp talons so close to delicate skin and yet never threatening. She hummed a low, indistinct noise, interspersed with odd clicking noises as she set about her task. Father Gideon looked away, unable to help. He was standing to one side of the fire, beside which a large cauldron of water steamed gently. On the other side, a big basket sat just near enough to be warm without scorching. Something large sat inside it, wrapped in a blanket. Bread proving, he thought for a moment, except that it would have been a very large loaf, even for a dragon. Then he noticed a gap in the folded blanket, showing something smooth, pale, and speckled with tiny flecks of brown. A thrill passed through him as he recognized the egg, and with it came a chill fear. Morgwm surely risked a terrible punishment if discovered. "Gallweed," Morgwm said, and a surge of guilt flooded through Father Gideon as he remembered why he was here. "Gallweed?" he asked. It sparked a memory, but he could not place it. "A nasty little poison. You humans have such dull senses. You cannot taste it, nor smell it. Your girl reeks of it. Someone has been administering her regular doses for months." "Who would do such a thing?" Father Gideon asked, although a nasty suspicion was forming in the back of his mind. "I was thinking you might be able to tell me," Morgwm said. "And who is this who attracts such a rare, potent, and expensive poison?" "You don't know her?" Father Gideon was surprised, perhaps expecting the dragon to know everything. But then it was unlikely she would ever have met any of the royal family. This is Princess Chrein, heir to the obsidian throne. He watched a brief flicker of fear flash across the dragon's eyes, her hands draw back involuntarily from the prone body before her. Then her shoulders slumped a weary resignation, and she turned once more to face him. "Well, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do," Morgwm said. "Princess Chrein is going to die."